Welcome to the OCTOPod. I'm Kyle Davis, head of the Office of the CTO. Join us as we dive into the latest technologies and trends shaping business. Whether you're a tech enthusiast, a business leader, or just looking to stay ahead in the digital age, this podcast is for you. Let's unlock opportunities with technology together.
Hi, and welcome to the OCTOPod. Once again, it's me, Tim Russell, and today I'm joined by Ryan Zoehner, CEO from Algo. Ryan, great of you to join us here today. Now, I appreciate we're going to have an episode of maybe 20 minutes, 20 seconds if you wish. But what I want to do is make sure you understand what you're going to get out of this. And there's some really interesting topics that we're going to talk about today. The first one, we're going to talk about what's blocking legacy migration, what's causing businesses to have to think about this. And some of the really amazing stuff out there, and particularly, obviously, I've got Ryan here today to talk about the Algo stuff, but what's out there to actually help people get over legacy blockers, but not only that, enable their latest cloud-based solutions to do far more than they realized they could. And the second part, we're going to have a touch on something called Martyn's Law, a very new introduction into the UK. I'll save it for the end of the podcast. We'll talk about that, but we're going to cover both of those angles. So, Ryan, do you want to just quickly say hi and just tell us a little bit about Algo, please?
Sure, Tim. Thanks for having me on. Yeah, Algo, we're a manufacturer of smart IP endpoints for public address, emergency alerting, and secure door entry. We make devices like speakers, intercoms, and strobe lights. And everything we build is designed to leverage and build upon a modern unified communication system. So we partner with the likes of Microsoft and Zoom and Cisco and others to really extend their software platform with hardware endpoints that reach frontline workers across any facility.
Oh, excellent introduction. Now, it's weird. I've been involved in telecoms for more years than I care to remember. It's got to be close on 35 years now. And what we saw is 35 years ago, facilities looked after communications infrastructure. They looked after the PBX because it was cables in the ground. And then the network team, they started looking after, well, back then it was 10 base 2. If anyone knows what that is, I feel sorry for you. And token rig and mainframes and all of that. But we've moved forward. But I've found over the last sort of 35 years, this gap between communications infrastructure and IP networks has remained, with the one side seeing the other as complex and difficult and try to keep away from it. And I've had a lot of conversations recently with customers who are like, well, we've got our core infrastructure, we know what that is, but we're struggling with what we call the modern workspace of community infrastructure. And quite often, even though they're aware that they've got this infrastructure, I think quite often they miss the fact that there is so much in it that they're not even aware of. Now, you said just there about beacons and strobes and things like that. I still remember that being weird and wonderful stuff that would have to pull rabbits out of hats to make it work. Now, maybe if we touch on some of those. So when we look at these legacy blockers, you start as an organization looking at your legacy infrastructure and remembering, I think 46% of UK companies still need to move to a cloud-based solution for communications. For that 46%, we've got a message. And for the other 54, we've obviously got a message as well. But maybe, Ryan, do you want to just help me understand the biggest blockers you're seeing from this capabilities in these legacy footprints and how you're working with customers to solve these issues?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting challenge we see across a lot of organizations, in that the migration starts with the obvious hardware and infrastructure that I think organizations think they need. We start with video conferencing rooms, we start with cameras, headsets, and we move our way along that journey. But I do think where we see organizations stumble is when it's coming to that core infrastructure. And maybe that's what's being managed by the facility managers as you're discussing. But a common example we will see is that organizations will have 30-year-old public address systems that are tied into legacy PBX, and the physical security team's not thinking much about it because it's just a core piece of infrastructure, the same way your light switch might be a core piece of infrastructure. But all of a sudden, a different team maybe modernizes the unified communication system, stands up a new platform, and you've broken that critical bridge to something that you thought was critical infrastructure, and now it's gone offline. And we're working with organizations every day to address that in really two ways. Is there's lots of smart and easy ways to kind of patch that back together. There's adapters and other tools that we can use to make that a simple integration, even leverage that existing infrastructure that was already there and tie that into a modern communication system. There's obviously, of course, choices to also modernize systems, and that comes with a host of benefits. But I think what we see is organizations often just aren't thinking about this final piece. And at Algo, we talk about it as the failed final mile of the UC migration. It's the part that maybe you didn't think about when you led into the project, but it is the part that ends up tripping you up at the end, Maybe you're at risk of not meeting some compliance requirements because you don't have critical infrastructure. Maybe your frontline workers aren't engaged. A lot of challenges, and we see this happening in the warehouses, the industrial environments, the hospitals. Like it's in less of the standard day-to-day office space, but it's in the ancillary part of the building is where it comes across. So we work with organizations every day who already made that migration, so that 54% you're referring to, and going, we didn't think about this part of the building, and we'll work with them to bring that online. But for that 46 that haven't gone, it's as simple as asking a couple questions about how you're going to bring in this critical infrastructure at the beginning of your project. And then I find you can address it so easily. And when it's thought through at the beginning, it becomes a non-blocker and a non-issue versus being a problem you have to come around to at the end.
Yeah, and I think what would be interesting is not just a technical perspective, and I hinted at it with the opening there, but those customers who have gone off and done a communication and collaboration infrastructure, they forget that lights, warning buzzers, door entry systems, they're part of comms and communication, and they're almost excluded. Now, I've got a perspective on this, but what do you think the key issue is in this outside of technology, why these items or these solutions get left into islands? Is it stakeholder mapping? Is it knowledge? Where does it sit?
Yeah, the answer is probably a little bit of everything, but I do think stakeholder mapping is a really big one because often the team that's running physical infrastructure is different than the team that's running core DC comms. So we do find that falling into different worlds. The second is I think that often is not the critical business pain point. So it's not the trigger and the reason why folks are moving and migrating systems. There are other benefits. You are seeking the benefit of a modern system that comes with a host of tools. And so while there are benefits to improve, your visual alerting, your audible alerting, that's typically not the driver that a lot of organizations think, hey, let me overhaul my entire IT stack. And so I think it's a combination of just being lower on the evaluation set, but then it becomes this major problem, but it wasn't your driver, or the stakeholder mapping in different teams. We do see that time and time again for us, the folks that reach out to us and go, hey, I have a problem, are not the teams that initiate the UC migration. They're the ones that are left kind of trying to piece everything back together. So I think that's probably the case.
So yeah, really, really good response there. And that stakeholder thing is, I think we're starting to see a change of. So I was talking to someone yesterday who's been discussing the changing technologies and that, and AI, of course. And what they've done is they've kind of merged their HR and their IT department because they realized they're actually doing far more aligned things than they are the old way of working. And I've spoken to a number of higher education organizations here in the UK recently, universities. I'm talking to one in a couple of weeks ago, but to the whole faculty, because the people I've spoken to there in the IT realized what I was talking about was the fact that these people need to talk together. You know, you can't, there's a university I spoke to recently, facilities went out in the last 6 months and bought a whole new door entry system, which has literally no external interface. I was like, well, how the hell are you going to cook that into your business information systems, understanding employee experience? And when we talk about visual alerting, that's absolutely hooks into the equity. We have to remember people have different capabilities. Visual representation of communication is just as important as the old-fashioned way that covers 90% of the workforce. Do you find that actually, going off at a tangent on that one, do you find that some of your solutions are then used to address or to help businesses make sure they create an equitable experience, not just about manufacturing lines, but about giving people alerts and information?
Yeah, no, I absolutely. And I think that's what we start to see is that it becomes a critical part of one of two worlds. It's either core operational technology that's going to be critical to the day-to-day use of that. And we talked about a manufacturing facility, so maybe it's bells and shift changes and things like that. Maybe it's built in. Talk about education facilities, like triggering schedules and other activity. The other side, of course, outside of operational technology is going to be safety and making sure we have critical messaging. So it definitely ties into both of those. But I think I go back to your example on that door entry system that was not connected. That's something that we run into all the time. And what ends up happening from our view is an organization still needs their public addresses. They still need their emergency system. But when it's left on an island, then not only is it harder to manage, harder to oversee everything else, but it's harder to get the colleagues in the building to use it properly. When you can tie this into the existing system the team's using every day, that colleague is either using the same client on their desktop, on their phone, they're picking up an IP phone, whatever the main trigger for broadcast is for day-to-day use. When we can tie other systems for our world, public address and alerting, into these, then all of a sudden you have user adoption being easier. The IT team's happier because you're leveraging existing tech stacks. Finance is happier because you haven't bought redundant systems. And then the user's happier because they don't have to be trained on a ton of different systems. All they need to be trained on is adding one little piece onto the system they already know and use. And so for us, it's such a logical choice to build and add on to these modern systems versus trying to have 6 to 8 different systems at once.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And I think also when you have islanded systems outside of the training, you end up with swivel chair actions. Ring this person to go and do something on a second system. When I can just open up an API, type into a chat room on Zoom or, as you say, Webex or whatever, open the front door. Am I authorized? Yes, it's done in a chat room. That's not science fiction. I mean, it's so simple. And I think it's getting businesses realizing that you've got to connect the dots in these systems. You've got to bring the stakeholders together. And you've got to understand that the end user experience, the equitable experience, the efficient experience, and the emotion you give to users, my E cubed score, if people have heard it before, is about connecting these together, connecting as a business from what you want to deliver to your end users and your customers, but connecting to understand how you can use systems better delivers the best outcome. Excellent. Now let's move on to the other one. Now, Martyn's law that came in, I think it was April, as you say, this year. Now, Martyn, for those who haven't heard of it, because of Martyn here in the UK. Now, right, I guess I'm going to lean on you here. I could talk about it. It's connected to protection of premises under the Terrorism Act. But, right, do you want to kind of give me a perspective of Martyn's law and how you're seeing asks or how you're expecting asks to come in for this?
Sure. So Martyn law has a few pieces to it, but at its core, what it really requires is a rapid and clear communication plan for every organization to address critical and emergency incidents. And there's some different levels decided based on the size of your organization of how robust and rigorous those plans must be. But the law itself believes how you address that to be relatively open. It mandates you must have training to staff. It mandates that you must have emergency response planning, including relevant communication systems. There must be staff assigned. But for us, this is very similar to laws that we've seen in other areas of the world and other verticals. To give a slight tangent, there is a law in the US called Alyssa's Law for panic and alerting in schools. And it requires some similar elements within that. And so we've worked with a lot of organizations that have been addressing laws like other countries have, but also now trying to address Martyn's law. And really what we're seeing organizations do is go, look, we know we need to address this. This is an obvious area that we need to improve. As a public venue, we want to make sure any occupants in our building are safe, securely communicated with. But really, where do we start? And how do we get into this? It's not a lack of willingness. It's a lack of understanding and knowledge. And for us, this ties back to what we just talked about on different systems. But we think there's some really, really easy ways that these organizations can leverage their existing modern UC systems to extend that reach, tying in smart speakers, smart alerters, other tools. And it can be a very, very simple add-on that leverages existing technology, but deliver an incredibly powerful and comprehensive communication system. And that's the big thing we always talk to folks about. It just because it's simple doesn't mean it's not really, really effective. And we find we can get folks across that line like way easily.
I guess that also what I'm hearing here as well, forgive me if I got it wrong, Ryan, it's not just about answering the requirement of Martyn's law, which, by the way, is for any premise singular that has a reasonable expectation to contain 200 or more people. And there's a lot of organizations that will fall into that. Maybe doesn't realize that they can use, as you rightly pointed out there, their existing infrastructure. But what I was getting back to saying is it's not just about addressing Martyn's law, it's about actually creating this communication structure where everything's connected, where you create an environment where everyone who needs to know knows. And it's not always, as you say, about phone in the hand and things like that. It's about creating visual and audible cues that help people understand what's happening, especially when you have larger, complex campuses. I guess, really for me, Martyn's law is very new. Do you think there's a key message we need to get out to organizations around Martyn's law and how they can start preparing? Is there a simple roadmap that they can follow?
Yeah, I think there are a couple simple things that organizations can look at. It's understanding those requirements, and as you've alluded to, it's a very simple set of requirements. So then the next step within that is understanding how that fits uniquely to your organization. Addressing Martyn's law is going to look different at a university campus. There's going to look different at a large retail store. There's going to look different at a government public bid. that is going to look different. And I think understanding how would you want to communicate with the occupants of your premise effectively is kind of where you start. Understanding, is it going to be audible communication? Is it going to be panic button triggering? Is it going to be visual messaging to direct people and direct traffic flow in a certain direction? Understanding for a second, forget the specifics of the law. What are you looking to accomplish in that premise? And then the next step, I think, is going, well, okay, if we now know what we want to accomplish, we want to be able to deliver really effective audible alerting, let's say across a facility to make people aware of an incident that's occurring. What system are you going to use? How are you going to tie that together? And that's where I do think we have seen people struggle. It's going, okay, does this mean I need to saddle up with a big new budget, a bunch of different things, start tackling a major project? And that's where I think we would encourage organizations to look inward and go, what solutions do you already have for communication across the premise? And then there's probably something that exists within your tech stack that we can leverage, and then we can build around. And we have seen that, if I now take the parallel back to the US and the Alyssa's law, we've seen that done time and time again. Organizations are going, you know what? I already use Teams, Microsoft Teams, to communicate across my campus. I already use Zoom. I already use Webex. I already use whatever platform I use. I'm going to take that and I'm going to build around that. I'm going to add smart endpoints. I'm going to add smart systems. I'm going to add some logic and intelligence. And all of a sudden, Tim, it went from this large, complicated, daunting task to a much, much simpler project that scales across what already exists. And so that's where I would kind of encourage the folks is basically understand the law, simple to do, understand your premise, kind of what do you want to accomplish to deliver to the occupants there, and then look inward and understand your tech stack before you start looking outside, because I think that's the easiest place to start.
Yeah, I agree. And I think you hinted there as well, is there's a skilling thing. Yeah, if you've got an existing platform that you consume or run yourself, adding this capability means you don't have to reskill. Your time to onboard, your time to address. I think government's got a 24-month period, so we've got some time to plan this all out. But the sooner you're on board, the sooner you can move to the next fun project or whatever it might be. But this is absolutely great. Right, I think we've hit the time for today, but we covered a couple of things, and I really hope the audience, particularly for those who hadn't heard of Martyn's Law, and tribute to Figan Murray, the mother of Martyn, who you might not know was killed in the Manchester Arena attack a few years ago, who drove for this change after the ramifications of what was effectively a room for improvement in communication and crowd control in large event locations. So really interesting. If you're any of the customers who sit in that space and you want to understand what else you can do, feel free to go and look on the government website and you can read about Martyn's Law. And similarly, reach out, talk to me or any contact you've got at CDW, and we can start helping hook up to your existing platforms and how we can help you address this requirement and deliver a safer working environment, particularly where you're handling large crowds. With that, Ryan, I'd like to say thank you very much. This has been a really informative session, and welcome you all back on the next podcast.
Be sure to check out the back catalogue for more great insights. Don't forget to subscribe via your favourite podcast platform so you never miss an episode. We appreciate your support, and if you have a topic you want us to cover, feel free to reach out. Catch you next time.